Welcome, my dear night wanderers, to another tale woven from the threads of shadow and despair. I am Violet Nocturne, your guide into the abyss of human fears. Tonight, I beckon you to listen closely. Our story begins with a thin thread, seemingly harmless, in a quaint little tailor's shop on the outskirts of a forgotten town. Beware, for not all stitches were made to hold things together. Some unravel the soul. Meet Annalee Parker, a talented but struggling fashion designer in her late 20s, desperate to make her mark in the competitive industry. The world had not been kind to her. Rejections flooded her inbox alongside bills she couldn't pay. One desperate afternoon, she stumbled upon Sylvia's Wonders, an unassuming tailor's shop she'd never noticed before. Its decaying sign swung precariously in the wind, with faded lettering suggesting it had been there for many lifetimes. Annalee felt an odd chill as the rusty bell above the door tinkled, announcing her arrival. Inside, the place smelled like mothballs and faint decay. Bolts of fabric, shimmering in uncanny colors, lined the walls. At the counter sat a woman of indeterminate age. Her face was flawless and doll-like, but her eyes gleamed with an unnatural sharpness. She introduced herself as Sylvia. "You need help," Sylvia said before Annalee could utter a word. Her voice was sweet, almost melodic. Annalee nodded, explaining her dream to launch a collection at the new London Fashion Expo, but lamenting her lack of resources. Sylvia listened quietly before reaching under the counter. She placed an ornate sewing needle onto the stained wood. Its smooth surface shimmered like polished silver, with delicate engravings that seemed to shift when glanced at from the corner of one's eye. "This needle," Sylvia began, "weaves possibility into fabric, but it requires something in return. A piece of you." At first, Annalee dismissed it as nonsense, but desperation has a way of bending reason. Sylvia handed her the needle. "Keep it," she said. "You'll understand its cost soon enough." Returning home, Annalee couldn't resist giving the needle a try. Her fingers moved like they had never moved before. Colors blended into one another perfectly. Patterns she'd only dreamed of sprang forward as if the needle had a life of its own. Her once stiff and unruly fabric now flowed like liquid silver. She worked deep into the night, stitching a dress so breathtaking that even she couldn't believe its beauty. The next morning, Annalee posted some designs online. To her utter astonishment, a renowned fashion blogger shared her work, dubbing her the dark horse of the new wave. Orders came flooding in, and Annalee felt the chains of obscurity breaking free. But things took a sinister turn when she noticed something strange in the mirror. The night after finishing her third dress with the enchanted needle, she spotted a faint, shimmering line across her forearm. It wasn't a scar, not exactly. It looked more like a stitch. The threads were so fine they seemed part of her skin. Brushing it off as sheer stress-induced imagination, Annalee pushed on. As her fame grew, so did her obsession with the needle. It refused to be set aside, whispering to her in dead silences, urging her to create. Soon, stitch-like patterns spread over her body, along her calves, her ribs, even lacing her fingertips. Her reflection grew detached from her movements, its glassy eyes following her like a stranger in the night. To Annalee's horror, the stitches didn't just appear. They tightened. Pain flickered through her limbs without warning, momentarily paralyzing her as if her own body were closing in on itself. Frantic, Annalee returned to Sylvia's shop, clutching the needle. "What's happening to me? Why am I—" She gestured to her visibly stitched arms. "Why am I unraveling?" Sylvia smiled, her porcelain face eerily calm. "That needle," she explained, "takes as it gives. You've sewn pieces of yourself into everything you've created." Annalee demanded to reverse it, to undo whatever curse had gripped her. For once, Sylvia seemed mildly amused. "The question is," Sylvia whispered, "even if you release the thread, will there be anything left of you?" In her desperation, Annalie threw the needle to the ground. She begged Sylvia for instructions on how to save herself. Sylvia handed her a pair of golden scissors, just as intricately engraved as the needle, and told her to cut every seam she had ever stitched with it. "A dangerous journey," Sylvia murmured. "Each cut may take something back, but at a cost." Annalie hesitated, dreading the thought of mutilating her creations, the very work she had dreamt of bringing to the world. Yet, as the stitches on her own body constricted further, she realized she had no choice. The days that followed were a nightmare. Snipping through the seams brought on tangible losses. Her laughter, her memories, even her sense of touch faded. By the time she finished dismantling her final piece, a gown that had fetched a fortune for its otherworldly beauty, it seemed as if every significant part of her personality had withered away. Her designs, her triumphs, her dreams, all gone. But the stitches across her trembling body unraveled, one by one. Annalie thought she could breathe again. Until a knock echoed from her front door the following evening. Sylvia stood outside, holding Annalie's final gown with a wicked grin. The dress had restitched itself, gleaming ethereally as if alive. "Perhaps you underestimated the needle," Sylvia purred, stepping inside uninvited. "You may have cut your ties, but the thread recalls what it has touched. It is no longer yours, but you belong to it." Sylvia stepped closer, holding out the shimmering gown. Annalie hesitated, but it pulled her in like a moth to flame. All-consuming darkness enveloped her the moment she touched the fabric. When Annalie awoke, she found herself in the glaring spotlight of a runway. The applause was deafening, but she wasn't in control. Her movements were stiff, mechanical, and she realized with numbing horror why. The stitches across her body had returned, sewing her into the very gown she had cut apart. Annalie was no longer the artist. She was the artwork, trapped in perpetual display. Sylvia's voice echoed in her mind. "A beautiful creation demands a price. Now you are eternal." So, dear listener, when you dream of weaving a masterpiece from your own struggles, do take care with what tools you use, lest you weave yourself into a tapestry you cannot escape. This concludes tonight's tale, but trust me, this story will echo in your mind long after the darkness has fallen. Until next time, I am Violet Nocturne. Sleep tight, if you can.